Good afternoon, friends. Today we will talk about Colonial Army in the series of the lectures which we are doing in the framework of the history of India from 1750s to 1857. And as we talked in the earlier lecture that how the Colonial Army got developed from 18th century onwards by the the East India Company, and how East India Company played an important role in the context of expanding its own territories, and Army's role was central to it. And we also talked about the labor markets, the military labor markets, and then this has also been seen in the framework of the Anglo-Indian militarism, in the context that how there was some kind of constant pressure for the conquest. So Douglas Pearce, he has argued in this particular conquest that this kind of Anglo-Indian militarism, it created the constant pressure for the conquest. But I would like to also point out that this Anglo-Indian militarism was not Indian from that point of view, that how British, the East India Company, was trying to create this kind of militarism. So British were the main people, those who wanted to use these kind of resources so that more and more conquest they could be undertaken for their own benefits. And Indian element was only there to the extent that Indians sepoys, they were being used for British ambitions. Then it also create, the army was able to create some kind of a self-importance for themselves, that how the empire's security and stability was dependent on army, and army was trying to sustain its claim to autonomy and unrestricted expenses. So we find that army was in a way trying to give this kind of an impression that army should be more and more autonomous, and the restrictions should not be there in the context of the expenses of the army, because army personnel were there to control these kind of resources. We find that in this kind of a recruitment which was being done, then the peasants, they were seen as the potential recruits, as I told you earlier, and how the wheat eating Indians, these kind of stereotypes, they were being promoted, and the wheat eating Indians rather than the rice eating ones, they were physically more suited for job. And thereafter we see that these wheat eating Indians from regions like Bihar and the regions like UP, they were being employed by the East India Company in their armies, and the rice eating Indians, they were not being employed. So such kind of stereotypes, they were being promoted or carried upon by the East India Company. So such kind of ethnic stereotyping was not a right thing to do, but British carried on with these kind of traditions. And Shekhar Bandyopadhyay, he has argued that how the how the Bhumihar and the Brahman, these kinds of people from the upper classes, they were being employed in the East India Company's army. And this kind of a policy where the caste, diet, travel and the other kinds of things, they were being in a way respected by the East India Company, such kind of practices which were associated with the religion. And it also fostered a high caste identity of the East India Company, and many of the socially ambitious castes like Bhumihar Brahmans, they could fulfill their aspirations for the social mobility. So this could also be seen in the context of the East India Company, and how so many peasants, they were being employed by the East India Company in their own armies. And over a period of time we see that these peasants, they were being used by the East India Company, and this kind of an idea was being promoted in the East India Company, that these peasants, they have to respect the salt, the loyalty to the salt. This kind of an idea was in a way promoted among the sepoys, and these sepoys, they were made to believe that they have to respect such kind of traditions, and if they will not follow such kind of traditions, then they are in a way giving some kind of a bad name to their own community, to their own caste, their own identity. So respecting of such kind of traditions was in a way promoted by the East India Company. And many times we see that Cornwallis, for example, who came as a governor, and later he became the Governor General of Bengal, and when he was there, when he came as the Governor General of Bengal, we find that he did not want to disturb this kind of an organization of the army, and despite the kind of Anglicization preference which he had, he wanted to maintain the earlier tradition. And we also find that the East India Company's army, which was largely from the high caste, and many a times it was also prone to revolt when their privileges and their benefits they were cut from 1820s. So what we find during this period is that, as I told you initially as well, that there is some kind of a shift from 1820s 30s onwards, when reforms they were being brought in the army administration. And for this lecture as well, you can follow the similar kind of readings which I told you earlier with regard to Seema Alvi's article on invalid thanas. You can also refer to the work of Amar Faruqi's article, which is dealing with the army in the late 19th century. And you can also refer to Shekhar Bandyopadhyay's work from Palasi to Partition. So this is some kind of reference material which you can use for this lecture as well. And when you see the kind of opportunities which are there, we find that various kind of opportunities came to the East India Company, because many of the states like Marathas, Mysore, they were being when they were being defeated, then a lot of surplus armed manpower was available, but it was not possible for the East India Company to absorb all manpower which was available with the East India Company. And these people, the dispossessed or the disbanded soldiers, rather not dispossessed but disbanded soldiers from these kind of armies, they were available to the East India Company so that they can augment their military resources. And what we also find is that East India Company it also expanded in the mountainous jungle Tarai in 1770s and after, and there was another attempt to recruit from among the hill tribes. So this also happens that not only from the plains regions but also from the regions of the Tarai, from the regions of the hill, some kind of army was created by the East India Company. And the recruitment system which was being followed in the plains, and the recruitment system which was being followed at other places was also different, because in the hill tribes the Khatwali service tenures which were being followed during the Mughal period, they were being used by the British. Such kind of tenures they were being used by the British at this point of time as well. And from 1815 we find that the Gorkha soldiers from the Nepalis, Garhwalis and the Sirmauri hillmen, they were being recruited by the East India Company. And the Gurkha traditions or the Gurkha soldiers were one of the most important army units of the East India Company, because and later as well, not only East India Company but after the Crown assumed the power in the Indian context, we find that the East India Company was able to not only East India Company but the British Crown was able to utilize such kind of resources which they created from 1815 onwards. And this kind of a tradition in the Gurkha context could be seen in the skillful blending of the Nepali martial tradition and European training and discipline, and because of which we find that the Gorkhas they became the most trusted soldiers in the British Army. So this kind of changes which came in the British Army after in 1815 and thereafter, when they fought war with Nepal, and after fighting this war with Nepal they also borrowed the kind of traditions from the Nepali army, where the Gurkha traditions and the British traditions they were amalgamated, and this kind of a unit which was being developed by the British. Another important concept which has been given by Seema Alvi is in the context of the invalid thanas, that how from 1778 onwards new areas they were being colonized, and the pockets of influence they were being created in the East India Company territory by settling within them retired soldiers called invalid soldiers. So what was happening in this context was that how these invalid soldiers, with the help of the invalid thanas, they were able to increase the stranglehold of the East India Company over the various regions. So it was possible because these soldiers, they were now those who have become invalid fighting in the East India Company's army, and they were different kinds. Invalid was defined as a sepoy who was there in the East India Company for a minimum period of 10 to 12 years and who was disabled by age or infirmity. So that was one kind of a sepoy who was seen as an invalid sepoy. There were others, those who had not served for 10 to 12 years, but they had become disabled by wounds when they were fighting for the East India Company, and some people, they became discharged from the service for their own personal reasons, and these people, these soldiers, they were being allotted plots of land generally near their homes. So these were the kinds of categories of the invalid sepoys, and these invalid sepoys of different categories, they were when they were being used by the East India Company to settle in certain areas, and these sepoys, they were given this plot of land generally near their homes, and when they were given such kind of plots of land near their homes, then these sepoys were able to put in their own money for the improvement of the land, and many a times they had a very cordial relation with the zamindars in which they were being given the land, and many a times they did not have that kind of cordial relations as well. So British, they had to look into such kind of factors, that where in which zamindari areas they were being allotted these plots of land, and these invalid sepoys, they made a lot of contribution in that context, that those areas, they were in a way developed because of their own efforts. So in the context of the importance of the invalid thanas, we find that it had a lot of political significance, because invalid thanas was projecting an image of British where they were seen as benevolent character, and it was also very important institutions, because East India Company was trying to replace the paradigm of legitimacy which was established by the Mughal state, and at the same time they were also helping the East India Company in colonizing the new land and creating more and more areas in the outlying areas for the East India Company. So from that perspective, we find that invalid thanas, they had a lot of importance for the East India Company, and at the same time we will also see that because of the invalid thanas or the invalid soldiers, those who were there, they were being deployed at a very small expense to the East India Company, and because of which the invalid sepoy, he was investing his labor and savings in cultivating the rent free jagir which was given to him. So these people, they became some sort of an effective landholding group, and invalid sepoy basically was like a new and wealthy zamindar in the region. So this kind of a thing, where the invalid sepoy became some sort of a new zamindar or a wealthy zamindar, where he was putting his own money, his own personal wealth for the promotion of that particular area. So these were some of the things which we see during this time, and this kind of an approach which was being used by the British in Ireland as well earlier, and thereafter they used this kind of an approach in India as well, and it also provided them this kind of a stranglehold on the Indian society and culture. And from 1820s we see that how when empire, it attained the stability with the weakening of the Indian powers and the East India Company's finances, they ran into trouble. So these kind of contradictions of this balancing game, they became apparent after this. This is what has been argued by Shekhar Bandyopadhyay in his work, that these kind of contradictions of this balancing game, they were apparent during this time. So some kind of attempts to streamline the army administration, and the main purpose of which was to have more rigorous control over the sepoys and their families. So what British, they were trying to do was that they wanted to have more and more control over the sepoys and their families. So the invalid sepoys, they were being monitored by the East India Company. Some kind of a department was established, so that sepoys, they were being given pensions on time, their families, they were also being looked after, they were the kind of data which the British wanted to create. They used all such kind of techniques, so that all information about the sepoys and their families is available to the East India Company. And many a times we find that sepoys, they were also not very happy with the kind of policies which were being followed by the East India Company. And because of the policies which were followed by the East India Company, initially they were respecting all the rituals which were being followed by the sepoys. But after some time, especially after 1820s 30s, when many of the reforms they were being introduced, then many of the traditions which were being followed earlier, they were not respected by the East India Company, and sepoys, they felt discontented because of that. And many a times we find that some sorts of mutinies, some sorts of revolt by the sepoys in different areas could also be seen. For example, in Barakpur in 1825, how sepoys, they fought for the high ritual status, and Mangal Pandey was one individual who became very popular in that context, and how he wanted to maintain the kind of ritual status which was there for the sepoys. And we also find that many campaigns which were led by the British in various areas, for example in Burma and other places. So there also how sepoys, they become discontented, because many of the privileges which were available to them earlier, now they were being denied those kind of privileges, double bhatta etc., which was paid to them, that was being denied to them. They were being discriminated in that context, that they cannot go beyond the rank of a subedar. So all these kinds of things with regard, apart from the racial policy which was followed by the British, that how Indians, they were being treated by the British. So that was another concern. So all these kinds of things, they in a way perturbed the sepoys. Sepoys were not happy with that, they became discontented, and that is why we see that apart from the revolt of 1857, which was comparatively seen as a sepoy mutiny, and thereafter as a first war of independence, when history is written from the nationalist point of view, and the Cambridge school or the colonialist idea is to just term it as a sepoy mutiny, because they want to reduce the importance of that particular event. But when we tend to see the importance of the event, because it was a political act, so why a political act is only reduced to a sepoy mutiny, and it took a lot of time for the British to subdue the various elements which were engaged in the revolt of 1857. So that is altogether a different matter. When we will discuss the revolt of 1857, then we will come to talk about all these issues. But here, when we are talking about the East India Company's army, then we will say that the East India Company's army, it had a variety of social groups and a number of military traditions, and how these kind of social groups, how these military traditions, they had to be accommodated, and some kind of a balancing act was to be done, and which we find in the context that the Bengal army was largely high caste army, and when you compare it with the Bombay army as well as the Madras armies, which were comparatively more heterogeneous in nature. And when we tend to see the kind of discontent or dissatisfaction among the sepoys, then Seema Alvi says that the reforms of 1830s, which were aiming at the leveling differences and promoting a universal military culture, they created discontent among the sepoys. And discontent was also showed in the Bengal army, as reforms, they infringed upon sepoys' high caste status, and it disturbed the power relations within which they were located. So we find that this kind of a discontent which we see in the sepoy army was as a result of the kind of reforms which were being brought about in 1830s and thereafter, where British, they were trying to promote a universal military culture, and on the other hand, sepoys, they were not ready for such kind of equality. They wanted that the kind of privileges which are available to them because of their caste status, they should be given to them, and they wanted that this kind of a equilibrium which was there earlier, it should not be disturbed. So this kind of a disturbance of power relations because of the reforms was not liked by the sepoys, and they were not ready to accept such kind of changes. And we also find that in this kind of a dissatisfaction could also be seen in the 1840s and thereafter. And this discontent which was there in the 1840s, and when Lord Dalhousie he comes and he introduces the doctrine of lapse, the issue of the greased cartridges, wherein the new rifle which was being introduced by the British, new cartridge was to be put, and this cartridge was to be bitten off by mouth, and it contained the cow fat as well as the pig fat, which was not suitable for the Hindus as well as the Muslims. So this issue of the greased cartridges also became very central to the revolt of 1857. So thereafter, after the revolt of 1857, we find that now this idea of martial races was also created, and there was a commission which was also established by the British, which was known as the Peel Commission, and it was saying that the native army, it should have diverse kinds of elements, and the Peel Commission argues that these diverse elements should be there in the army. And after the revolt, we see that many of the regiments which mutinied, they were being disbanded by the British, and we will find that different castes, they were being in a way mixed across the regiments, and the recruitment now remained focused on Punjab, which remained loyal during mutiny. So what we find in the context of the changes which came during this time is that the idea of martial and non-martial races, they were being introduced, and the groups which supported the British during the revolt of 1857, they were considered to be martial, and they were to be employed on a larger scale, and the groups which did not support the British, they were considered to be non-martial, and their regiments and their people, they were not to be employed in the colonial army. So this idea of loyalty was became some sort of a benchmark for for recruiting the armies, and these kind of racial stereotyping was also being done in this context, where you were talking about the martial as well as non-martial races. So Professor Amar Farooqi has also talked about the British or the colonial army, especially in the context of the late 19th century, and he has argued that the British army was not seeing Indians as some sort of individuals. Sepoys were not seen as individuals, but they were only seen as members of specific communities. So their idea was not to see sepoys as individuals, but rather they were being seen as members of some communities, so that this kind of idea is being promoted among the sepoys, that you are only a member of one particular community, and they were being denied individuality and commonality, so that this kind of a stereotyping will bring about that kind of a change, where the communities will be visualized as only being closed, exclusive and virtually static. So these kind of ideas, they were being promoted, and this could also be seen in the divide and rule policy which was being followed by the British, where animosity between the various ethnic groups, various religious identities, they were being fostered as official policy, and this policy could be seen at every level from 1857 onwards, when they initially they supported the Hindu and they suppressed the Muslim community, and thereafter they wanted to in a way favor the Muslim community and suppress the Hindu community, and vice versa at different times, so that some kind of competitiveness between these communities is there, and they are not able to unite themselves as they had done earlier during the revolt of 1857. So what we also find is that the East India Company, for example, it wanted to valorize the image of the soldiers' uniforms and the other kinds of insignia they were being introduced from the initial times, so that sepoys they have some kind of a prestige, some kind of an identity, some kind of a reputation attached with all this kind of paraphernalia of uniforms, insignia, etc., and they are able to take pride, and at the same time certain traditions they were also being promoted, that they have to follow such kind of traditions, loyalty to the salt, so that they do not in any way try to rebel against the British against the British. So from that perspective, when we see that the loyalty of the army was an important concern, and British, they wanted to maintain this kind of a loyalty for themselves at different points of time, and we see that the large army was devouring around 40% of the revenue at different points of time, and David Omisi, he has seen British Raj as some sort of a garrison state. So when you see the British Raj at different points of time, that how British, they were able to capture so many areas for themselves. We also see not only in India but apart from India, other regions, you will find that how wars were fought with Nepal, wars were fought with Afghanistan, wars were fought with Burma and with other regions as well, and thereafter the Indian army was being employed at such places. So what we find is that many a times there was some sort of a conflict between the civilian elements and the military elements, and in 1905 there is a Curzon-Kitchener controversy as well, but that is a period which we are not going to talk about, because our focus largely is on from 1750s to 1850s. But what we also find is that this kind of a controversy was not new. Many a times these kind of things, they happen, and in the context of, when you tend to see that whenever the British came across, or when they were seen in opposition to the Indian soldiers, then British, they always, even though they were many a times the British, they were being employed always at a higher rank, and Indians, they could not go beyond their masters in terms of appropriating the rank. And what we also find is that many a times the kind of changes which were being brought about, and these kind of problems, they were there during the times of Lord Amherst, William Bentinck, and as I told you in 1905 as well. So such kind of stereotyping that was being done, so that British, they are able to secure that kind of control over the Indian army, and Indians, they are not able to feel that they were in any way comparable to the British soldiers. And this also continues in the 20th century as well, where we find that army was being used, police was being used by the British in a way to suppress the national movement, and we find that army was quarantined in garrisons across India. They were kept at low levels of literacy, and they were not in a way connected to the civilian population, so that whenever some kind of a need arose, these people, the army personnel, were ready to fight against their own countrymen, because they were not in a way connected with their civilian population. So what we find is that the army's role was varied in nature, and it was not frequently used for policing the country, because its effectiveness would go away if it would be used quite frequently, and its demonstration impact will not be there. So in the case of grave emergencies, army was used, and what we also find is that army was largely loyal to the king. When we see in the 20th century, we find that especially in 1907 Canal colony agitation in Punjab, and in 1926 Gurudwara movement, sepoys, they were touched by the political agitation. Otherwise sepoys, they were not directly concerned with these kind of agitations. But thereafter we also find that in the national movement, army was also involved at a later time, and in the framework of the Indian National Army INA, which was started by Netaji, as well as the revolt of the Indian Mutiny, which we find, and the contribution of the army in the First World War and the Second World War could also be seen. So what we find is that the army was a very significant kind of a unit for the East India Company as well as the British Crown in the later times, and they used the army for their own purposes, so that the control of the East India Company as well as the British Crown, it remains over the Indian areas. So I would like to end the discussion here. Thank you very much.